In the spring of 1462, an Ottoman diplomatic convoy rounds a bend in the mountains of Wallachia and stops dead. Not one body, not 10, not 100. Thousands of human beings, impaled on wooden stakes stretching in every direction as far as the eye can reach. A forest of the dead, arranged in perfect concentric circles. Birds have been at the bodies for days. Some of the victims are still alive, and sitting in the center of it, at a table, eating his meal, is the man who ordered it. His name is Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia. You know him as Dracula. You have never known him at all. Before we go into the darkness that created this man, drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from, and if you have not subscribed yet, do it now. You are watching Yesterlore, the best dark history channel in the world, and this is a story that has been told wrong for 500 years. Chapter 1. The World That Made Him. Nobody is born like this. That is the first thing worth saying, before we go any further into what Vlad III did. The cape and the fangs and the castle in the fog let you believe in a creature that simply arrived, fully formed, from some darkness outside human experience. The real man had a childhood. He had a father. He had a country. And the country is where this actually starts, because Wallachia in the 1430s is not a place. It is a condition. A thin strip of mountainous, forested territory sitting between two expanding empires, with nothing to protect it but the mountains themselves. To the north and west, the Kingdom of Hungary, Catholic, ambitious, watching every development in the Balkans with predatory patience. To the south and east, the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Murad II, a military machine that has spent the last century swallowing the remnants of Byzantium and pressing its borders steadily toward the heart of Europe. Wallachia sits directly in the middle of that pressure. Not a kingdom, a buffer, the kind of territory that great powers use as a bargaining chip and discard when the bargaining is done. The men who ruled it did not die of old age. They died on battlefields, at the hands of assassins hired by rival noble factions, in dungeons, on stakes. The throne changed hands so frequently that the average reign barely lasted a few years. Being named Prince of Wallachia was not an elevation. It was a countdown. Into this sits the House of Draculaesti. The name comes from the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric military order founded by the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund to defend Christian Europe against the Ottoman advance. Vlad's father, Vlad II, is a member. He takes the honorific Dracul, dragon in Romanian, though Dracul carries a second meaning that sits just beneath the surface of the word: devil. His son, born around 1431, inherits the suffix Dracula, son of the dragon, son of the devil. Both translations are accurate. Both will prove appropriate. Vlad Dracul, the father, is the product of his environment the way all survivors are. He signs pledges to the Ottomans and honors them until honoring them stops being useful. He pledges loyalty to the Hungarians and means it until meaning it becomes dangerous. He raises his children in a court where the standing question every single morning is who is currently trying to remove him and whether any of the people at his own table are involved. It is not paranoia. It is operational accuracy. The men who stop asking that question do not last. He has 3 sons, Mircea, the eldest, being groomed for succession, Radu, the youngest, still a small child, and Vlad, the middle one, born around 1431, watching everything. The boy is perceptive in the specific way that children raised in dangerous courts become perceptive, not academically, but with the bone-level attentiveness of someone who has learned that reading a room incorrectly has consequences. He watches his father perform loyalty for Ottoman ambassadors while writing different letters to the Hungarian court. He watches alliances assemble and dissolve within a single season. He is learning something that no curriculum teaches: the actual mechanics of power, when the only rule is survive, the gap between what men say and what they mean, and how to measure that gap from across a room without letting anyone see you measuring. Then, in 1442, when Vlad is approximately 11 years old, his father makes a decision that converts all of that watching into something with no name in any language that does not involve the word wound. Chapter 2. Handed to an empire. Sultan Murad II has grown suspicious of Vlad Dracula's loyalty. The Wallachian prince has been seen cooperating with the Hungarians more than the terms of his Ottoman arrangement permit. He has been supporting, or at least not adequately opposing, Hungarian military operations in the region. The Sultan requires a demonstration of genuine loyalty, not words on paper, something that cannot be taken back. Vlad Dracula makes a decision in 1442 that he tells himself is the only option available to him, and which he will spend the rest of his life unable to fully live with. He agrees to hand over 2 of his sons as hostages, Vlad, who is approximately 11 years old, and Radu, who is somewhere around 7 or 8 years old. A father looks at his 2 children and hands them to an empire as collateral. He rides away. He leaves them there. The boys are taken south, eventually arriving at Edirne, the Ottoman capital. What awaits them there is not a dungeon. The Ottomans operated with considerably more sophistication than that when it came to political hostages of noble blood. The boys are housed, educated, given access to the resources and culture of the most powerful empire between the Atlantic and Central Asia. They are taught Ottoman Turkish. They study philosophy, military science, horsemanship, and the Quran. They move through a world of extraordinary refinement. The textiles, the architecture, the intellectual culture of the Ottoman court in the mid-15th century is operating at a level that makes most of the European courts of the same period look provincial by comparison. But they are captives, and they know this with a clarity that no amount of silk upholstery or quality tutoring can obscure. Every comfort they receive is conditional. It exists at the pleasure of the man who could end their lives the moment their father's political behavior stops meeting Ottoman expectations. They wake up every morning knowing that somewhere in a room they will never enter, men with real power make decisions about whether they continue to exist. This knowledge works on the 2 brothers in completely opposite directions. Radu, the younger, adapts. He is 7 years old when he arrives, young enough that the Ottoman world becomes his actual world, rather than a world imposed upon him. He forms a close relationship with Mehmed, the Sultan's son, a brilliant and intense young man who will grow up to become Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople. Radu converts to Islam. He adopts Ottoman customs so completely that he becomes, in every meaningful sense, a product of the empire rather than a hostage within it. History will call him Radu the Handsome. He is charming, adaptable, politically skilled, and completely at home in the world that once held him prisoner. He will spend the rest of his life as a loyal instrument of the Ottoman court, and he will become, in time, the single most dangerous enemy his older brother has. Vlad absorbs the Ottoman world differently. He learns the language. He studies the military methods, the tactics, the organizational structures of the most effective fighting force in the medieval world. He watches how the Ottoman system operates, how power is exercised and maintained, how fear is used as an administrative tool across an empire of millions. He takes in everything, but he does not adapt. He does not absorb. He observes and he stores what he sees the way a man in a burning room memorizes the location of every exit. He is learning from his captors the way you learn from a doctor who has broken your arm, with total attention, with zero trust, and with the absolute private conviction that when you get out, you will never allow anyone this kind of access to you again. The psychological fingerprint of those years in Ottoman captivity is visible on every decision Vlad makes as a ruler. The specifics are debated by historians because the sources are incomplete, but the signature is unmistakable. A man for whom helplessness was not just an unpleasant experience, but the defining trauma of his formation. A man who developed, underneath whatever composed exterior he maintained for his handlers, a relationship with control and the fear of losing it that would ultimately express itself in ways that his contemporaries had no framework to process. He was not simply hardened by captivity, he was restructured by it. The capacity for warmth or mercy that a different childhood might have developed was crowded out by something colder and more durable. A set of calculations that began and ended with one question: who has power over whom? And how do I make sure the answer is always me? In 1447, the arrangement that had sent Vlad into Ottoman hands collapses. His father, Vlad Dracula, is assassinated by a coalition of Wallachian boyars, the powerful noble class that held enough collective leverage to make or unmake any prince. The assassins do not simply kill the older Vlad. They eliminate him in a manner designed to send a message to anyone who might try to succeed him. Vlad Dracula is murdered in a swamp near the town of Balteni. His eldest son, Mircea, the heir who was supposed to inherit the throne, is captured by the same boyar coalition. What happens to Mircea is documented in enough sources to be accepted as historical fact, and is disturbing enough that most popular accounts of Vlad III skip past it quickly. Mircea is blinded with hot irons. Then he is buried alive. Vlad, the middle son, is still sitting in Ottoman custody when these reports arrive. His father, murdered in a swamp. His elder brother, blinded and buried alive. His throne, occupied by an enemy installed by the men who killed his father. He is 17 years old. Consider what those two facts mean in combination. He has spent 6 years learning, at the most intimate possible level, exactly how violence and power interact. He has just received news that every male member of his immediate family above him in the succession has been eliminated through acts of deliberate cruelty. He is a prince of Wallachia with no family, no throne, no allies, and no resources, held in a foreign court at the pleasure of an empire. This is the raw material. Everything that comes after is the product of it. Chapter 3. The Education of a Pretender. The Ottomans, processing the assassination of Vlad Dracula and looking at the young man they currently hold in custody, make a calculation. Vlad is the legitimate heir to the Wallachian throne. Installing him as Prince of Wallachia with Ottoman backing would create a client state in a strategically valuable buffer territory. They place him on the throne in 1448, backed by Ottoman cavalry. It lasts less than 2 months. Forces backed by the Hungarian regent John Hunyadi sweep into Wallachia and drive the Ottoman-backed prince out before he can consolidate anything. Vlad flees north and east, eventually landing in Moldavia, the territory to the northeast of Wallachia, where he lives under the protection of his cousin Bogdan II. He observes. He learns. He waits. When Bogdan is himself assassinated in 1451, Vlad moves again, this time into Transylvania, where he attaches himself to the court of John Hunyadi, the very Hungarian leader whose forces expelled him from his first brief reign. This is not inconsistency or desperation, though it has elements of both. It is a demonstration of the same calculation-first thinking that his Ottoman years built into him. Hunyadi has military resources that Vlad needs. Hunyadi has his own reasons to want a friendly Wallachian prince who owes him his throne, rather than an Ottoman-aligned one who might give the Sultan a permanent foothold north of the Danube. Their interests temporarily align. Neither of them trusts the other. Both of them use the arrangement for what it is worth. Vlad spends the next several years moving through the courts and military camps of Central Europe, building relationships, carefully positioning himself, and absorbing everything. He watches how Hunyadi, one of the finest military commanders of the 15th century, organizes and deploys his forces. He studies the politics of the Hungarian court. He makes himself useful wherever he can while staying mobile enough to survive if the political winds shift. He is also watching Wallachia from the outside, studying its internal power structures with the patience of a man who knows he will eventually have to take control of them. He catalogs the boyar factions. He identifies which families backed his father's assassins. He notes which local power structures are strong enough to threaten a prince and which ones are fragile enough to be dismantled. He is building the mental architecture of a takeover before he has any of the practical resources required to execute one. In 1456, the opportunity arrives. Vladislav II, the prince currently occupying the Wallachian throne, is killed in battle. The circumstances are contested by sources, but Vlad's involvement in or around the death of his predecessor is strongly suggested. Whether by direct action or by opportunism, Vlad III takes the throne of Wallachia for the second time. This time he is 25 years old. He has spent the last 9 years in courts, military camps, and exile, studying power with the focused attention of a man who knows that any mistake in the next phase of his plan is unrecoverable. He has no intention of losing this throne in 2 months. He has no intention of losing it at all. He begins immediately. Chapter 4. The Easter Sunday Massacre. The single greatest threat to any Wallachian prince is not an invading army. It is the boyar class. The boyars are the hereditary nobles of Wallachia, the large landowners whose accumulated wealth and local authority give them the capacity to withdraw their loyalty from any prince and transfer it to a rival at any moment. They killed Vlad's father. They buried his brother alive. They have been destabilizing Wallachian princes for generations, backing whoever seems most likely to protect their interests, discarding whoever stops being useful. They are the reason that the Wallachian throne has been occupied by so many different men in such rapid succession for the past century. They are the internal system that makes external enemies possible. Vlad understands this with total clarity. He also understands that he cannot simply rule while the boyar power structure remains intact. He cannot build anything durable in Wallachia as long as there is a class of men with enough resources and local authority to replace him the moment his attention is directed elsewhere. His solution is not subtle. It is not gradual. It does not involve buying loyalty through concessions or building coalitions through marriage alliances. It involves a banquet on Easter Sunday, 1457, and an act of such thorough brutality that it changes the political structure of Wallachia in the span of a single afternoon. He invites the boyars to a feast. The occasion is Easter, the holiest day in the Orthodox Christian calendar, which makes the invitation seem like an act of reconciliation, a ruler gathering his nobles in a spirit of religious celebration. The accounts vary in their details. Some sources suggest Vlad specifically invited the families he knew had participated in his father's assassination and his brother's burial. Some suggest the invitation was broader, a general gathering of the nobility. What the sources agree on is the sequence of events that followed the meal. The boyars eat and drink. And then, when the meal is finished and the wine has done whatever work wine does on men who have no reason to be suspicious of a prince who has just fed them, Vlad has them arrested. What happens next unfolds over days, and in some cases weeks, and it is calibrated with the particular attention to meaning that characterizes everything Vlad does. Some of the boyars are impaled on the spot, their bodies raised on stakes outside the banquet hall as a message to anyone watching who might be tempted to resist. Others, particularly those identified as having participated directly in his father's murder or his brother's blinding and burial, are marched out of the city toward the ruins of a fortress on a cliff above the Argus River at Poenari. There, still dressed in their feast clothes, still in the fine robes appropriate to Easter dinner with their prince, they are forced to work with their own hands, breaking stone, carrying timber, rebuilding the ruined fortress that will become Vlad's personal stronghold and refuge. He works them without mercy, without adequate food, without rest, until the fine clothes become rags and the hands that once signed documents and accepted tribute are torn open from handling stone, until men who have never done physical labor in their lives drop from exhaustion, collapse from the heat or the cold, depending on the season, and die on the hillside, doing work that is killing them as deliberately as any stake. just more slowly.
He rebuilds a fortress on the bones of his enemies. He does this consciously and deliberately. The fortress at Ponadi is real, and it is still standing, and the history of how it was built is not a metaphor. The effect on the surviving boyar class is precisely what Vlad intends it to be. The network of hereditary noble power that has been undermining Wallachian princes for generations is shattered within the first year of his reign. Not weakened through political maneuvering, not diluted through negotiation, destroyed as a functioning power structure, and replaced with men appointed by Vlad personally, men who owe their positions entirely to his favor, and who understand, with bone-deep clarity, what happens to people who become threats to his authority. For the first time in living memory, Wallachia has a prince who does not need to balance the boyars. He has burned the scales. Chapter 5. The Impalement System. It is necessary to talk about the mechanics of impalement because Vlad Tepes did not simply use it as a method of execution. He developed it into a system of communication, a language written in bodies that he used to send messages with a precision and specificity that no other medium available to a 15th century prince could match. Impalement as an execution method predates Vlad. It was practiced across the Ottoman world, in Persia, in parts of the Byzantine Empire. What Vlad did with it was novel. He turned it from a punishment into a grammar. The mechanics first, because they matter to understanding the psychology of what he was doing. The stake was not simply driven through the body. It was prepared with deliberate care. The wood was selected for the right diameter and density. The point was carved to a specific taper. The stake was oiled before use. The reason for the oil, documented across multiple sources, is the most disturbing detail in the entire catalog. It ensured that the internal organs were not immediately ruptured, so the victim would not die quickly from internal bleeding. The oiled stake parted the tissue rather than tearing it. Death came from exposure, dehydration, blood loss from the wounds at the entry and exit points, and in some cases from the progressive descent of the body down the stake as the victim's own weight worked against them over hours or days. The process was designed to maximize duration. A person impaled by Vlad's method might survive for hours. In documented extreme cases, for more than a day. Now the grammar. The height of the stake indicated the social rank of the victim. A peasant was raised on a short stake, a boyar on a taller one, a foreign ambassador on the tallest stake available. This was not arbitrary. It was a precise inversion of the hierarchy of respect, a way of saying, in this system, your status in life determines the scale of your humiliation in death. The higher you were, the higher we will lift you, and the longer everyone will have to look at what you have become. The arrangement of the stakes in formations had its own logic. Circles around city walls communicated a specific message to anyone approaching. This is what you will find if you enter as an enemy. Rows along major roads served as navigation markers for travelers passing through Wallachian territory. Clusters outside the gates of towns he had just taken communicated to the surviving population exactly the cost of resistance. He varied the orientation of the stakes by the offense committed. Some victims were impaled facing upward, the conventional orientation. Others were impaled horizontally, or at angles, or facing downward. The specific arrangement communicated specific information about the nature of the crime that had earned the punishment, information that the population of Wallachia, who had learned to read his system by simple exposure and survival instinct, understood the way a modern population reads traffic signs. He used impalement against every category of person who crossed the boundaries he set. Foreign soldiers and spies, corrupt officials at every level of government, merchants who cheated customers, thieves, adulterers, priests who failed to meet his standards, monks who prayed for the wrong outcomes, ambassadors who offended him with gestures, women who failed to maintain their households adequately, men who were rude to him in his hearing, disabled and poor people whom he had decided were a net burden on the territory he was running.
The numbers that survive in contemporary sources are staggering enough that historians have spent considerable effort trying to determine how literally to take them. A Saxon chronicle records 30,000 impaled in a single punishment operation against the city of Amlas and its surrounding region. Another source records 20,000 impaled in the operation that created the famous forest outside Targoviste that stopped the Ottoman army in 1462. Individual incidents recorded across German, Hungarian, Byzantine, and Ottoman sources range from dozens to thousands, and the accounts are detailed enough and come from enough independent observers with no obvious reason to coordinate their exaggerations that the broad scale of what he did is not seriously questioned by any reputable historian. The debate is only about precise numbers. What is consistent across every source is the deliberateness. The choice of stakes over any other method of execution is not expedience. It is not the easiest way to kill people. It is slow, labor-intensive, and requires preparation. It was chosen because it had specific properties as a communication tool that no other method possessed. It was visible from a distance. It was durable, lasting for days or weeks before decomposition made the display impractical. It was scalable from one individual to 20,000 without losing its essential quality. And it was interpretable. Anyone who saw it understood, without needing it explained, exactly what had been communicated. Vlad was not simply killing people. He was publishing policy in a medium that his audience could not look away from. Chapter 6. The Golden Cup and the Safest Country in Europe. Under Vlad III, Wallachia became one of the safest territories in southeastern Europe. This is documented not by sources friendly to Vlad, who was more widely hated than admired among his contemporaries, but by travelers and foreign merchants who had nothing invested in making him look good. They report that roads through Wallachia that had previously been infested with bandits were clear, that merchants could conduct transactions without fear of being cheated, that travelers could leave valuables unattended and find them exactly where they left them, that the level of ordinary crime, the petty theft and corruption and dishonest dealing that was endemic to every other territory in the region, had effectively disappeared. Vlad enforced this through the same mechanism he used for everything else. He made the cost of disorder so catastrophic, so certain, and so public that disorder became a rational impossibility for anyone who wanted to continue living. The Golden Cup is the most documented symbol of what he achieved. He had a large cup of solid gold placed at the public fountain in the center of his capital city, Targoviste. It sat there, in plain view of everyone, completely unguarded. The cup was valuable enough that a single thief could live comfortably for years on its worth. It remained at the fountain, unguarded, for the entirety of Vlad's primary reign, which lasted from 1456 to 1462. Nobody touched it. This was not because the people of Wallachia lacked greed or desperation. There was poverty in Wallachia, and people who would have benefited enormously from the value of that cup. It remained untouched because everyone in Wallachia understood, through years of watching what happened to people who stole under Vlad's rule, that the hand that reached for that cup would be publicly impaled within a time frame that made the theft not merely unprofitable, but definitionally suicidal. The fear was so complete, so well calibrated by years of public demonstration, that it did not need to be actively maintained. It maintained itself. Vlad had achieved something that rulers with vastly more conventional methods of governance never manage: a population that polices itself, not out of civic virtue or moral consensus, but out of the absolute certainty that the alternative to compliance is a death that will be slow and public and specifically designed to be witnessed by as many people as possible. Chapter 7. The War with the Saxons. Vlad's relationship with the Saxon merchant communities of Transylvania is one of the most documented aspects of his reign, because the Saxons produced many of the surviving accounts of his atrocities, including the German-language pamphlets that made him the most notorious figure in 15th-century Europe. The Saxons of Transylvania were a prosperous trading community with established commercial relationships throughout Central and Southeastern Europe. They operated markets, conducted trade in both directions across the Wallachian border, and had a history of involvement in Wallachian political disputes, backing rival claimants to the Wallachian throne when it suited their commercial interests. Vlad's hostility toward them had specific roots. The Saxon merchants of Brasov, the largest and most commercially significant of the Saxon cities, had supported his rivals during the years he was building his return to power. They had backed candidates friendly to their trading interests and opposed his consolidation of the throne. In the precise calculus of political debt that Vlad applied to every relationship, they owed him for that opposition. The trade disputes were the proximate cause of open conflict. Wallachian merchants, operating under the protection of trade agreements that the Saxons were consistently evading, were being denied the right to sell freely in Saxon-controlled markets, while Saxon merchants were given preferential access to Wallachian territory. Vlad ordered the trade agreements enforced. The Saxons continued to evade them. He decided to enforce the agreements himself. What followed is documented in extraordinary detail in the Saxon Chronicles, which is exactly why we know as much about it as we do. Vlad led raids into Saxon territory that went well beyond enforcing trade agreements. He burned villages. He drove populations from their homes.
He collected prisoners by the thousands and brought them back to Wallachia, where they were impaled in the arrangements that would become characteristic of his method. One account from Brasov, which is specific enough to have been taken seriously by subsequent historians, records that Vlad sat at a table in the midst of a forest of stakes containing the impaled bodies of prisoners taken during one of these raids, and ate his meal there. The account specifies that he had one of his servants cut the hands and heads off corpses nearby while he ate. When a courtier with him reportedly expressed discomfort at the smell, Vlad had him impaled on a stake taller than the others, so that, as the account records Vlad explaining, the man's nose would be safely elevated above the source of offense. The Saxon pamphlets that record these incidents are the earliest documented example of mass-produced political propaganda in European history, exploiting the printing press, which Gutenberg had put into practical use just years earlier, to circulate accounts of Vlad's cruelty across the German-speaking world. They were printed with woodcuts illustrating the specific scenes described in the text, images of forests of bodies on stakes, of the prince eating among the dying, of prisoners being tortured in specific configurations. They were enormously popular. Readers who had never been within 1,000 miles of Wallachia consumed them with the same horrified fascination that drives millions of views on dark history content today. Fear has always been commercially successful, and the Saxons understood that Vlad's reputation, properly broadcast, would bring political consequences from the Hungarian court and the Holy Roman Empire that their commercial leverage alone could not achieve. The accounts in the pamphlets are not entirely reliable. They were produced by Vlad's enemies for the specific purpose of building a political case against him. Some of the specific incidents described have been questioned by historians, but the consistent core of them, the impalements, the scale of the killings, the specific incidents of his feasting among bodies, are corroborated across enough independent sources that the essential truth of the portrait they paint is not seriously disputed. What the pamphlets do not include, because it does not serve the propagandistic purpose, is any acknowledgement of the trade disputes that triggered the conflict, or any context for the political conditions in which Vlad was operating. They present him as a monster without antecedents, a creature of pure cruelty, with no political logic driving him. That presentation shaped his reputation in the European imagination for centuries, eventually reaching Bram Stoker in the late 19th century, and through Stoker, reaching you. Chapter 8. The Feast for the Poor. Of all the documented acts attributed to Vlad during his primary reign, this is the one that sits in the most disturbing category. Not because it is the largest in scale, it almost certainly is not, but because of what it reveals about the structure of his thinking. Wallachia in the mid-15th century has significant populations of people living in poverty, disability, and chronic illness. These are people who cannot work, who depend on charity, begging, or the support of religious institutions to survive. In virtually every other contemporary European polity, these people occupy a defined social role. They are the recipients of Christian charity, the subjects of ecclesiastical welfare, a permanent feature of the human landscape that rulers manage through the church and through customary social arrangements. Vlad looks at them and sees something different. He sees variables in an equation. He sees mouths that consume resources and bodies that produce nothing, and he decides to solve the equation. The account appears in the German pamphlets and in other sources with enough consistency to be taken seriously as reflecting something that actually happened, even if the specific details vary across different versions. Vlad issues an invitation to the poor, the crippled, the chronically ill, the homeless, and the beggars of Wallachia. He invites them to a great feast. He provides a hall. He sets tables with food and wine and all the things that people who have nothing do not get to have. The guests arrive. They eat. They drink. They are warm and fed, perhaps for the first time in months or years, and they feel something that might be gratitude, or might simply be the physical relief of not being hungry. When the meal is finished, Vlad addresses them. The question he asks varies by source, but the essential content is consistent. He asks them whether they would like to be without want forever, whether they would like to be free of suffering and need. They say yes. He has the hall sealed and burned. His reasoning, as recorded in sources that appear to be drawing on accounts from people who were present or close to court, is straightforward to the point of being actively chilling. These people suffer. They cannot help themselves. They are a burden on the resources of Wallachia. They take from a system without contributing to it. Ending their lives is, in his framework, both a mercy to them individually and a rational act of resource management for the territory he is running. This is not the logic of a sadist who enjoys watching people suffer. It is the logic of a man who has reduced human beings to a purely functional calculus and found the answer to the function, called human suffering, to be elimination. The warmth, the grief, the moral horror that a person with normal emotional architecture feels when considering burning a room full of disabled and hungry people is simply not present in his calculation, not suppressed, not overcome, simply absent. The peasantry of Wallachia, the working people who did not fall into any of the categories he had decided were unproductive, understood the deal they were living under. Vlad protected them. He cleared the roads of bandits. He broke the power of the noble class that exploited them. He created conditions in which their labor and their goods were reasonably safe from theft. In exchange, they lived under a system where the price of stepping outside the boundaries of his expectations was a death designed to be as public and as prolonged as possible. It was not a contract they chose. It was a condition they survived. And the sources that survive from the period, including Russian and Balkan chronicle traditions that present Vlad very differently from the German pamphlets, suggests that many ordinary Wallachians experienced his reign as an improvement over the chaos and boyar exploitation that had preceded it. That is the deepest discomfort in the historical record of Vlad Tepes. He was not wrong that Wallachia needed radical reconstruction. He was not wrong that the boyar class was destroying the territory. He was not wrong that crime and corruption had made ordinary life precarious for working people. His diagnosis of the problem was accurate. His prescription was a system of terror that burned rooms full of disabled people and impaled tens of thousands of human beings. And by the metrics that mattered to the people who were not among his victims, it worked. What do you do with that? Chapter 9. The Night Attack and the Sultan Who Turned Back. By 1461, the political accommodation between Vlad and the Ottomans has completely collapsed. The trigger is a dispute over the annual tribute that Wallachia is required to pay as a condition of peace with the empire. Vlad has stopped paying it.
He has also been conducting raids into Ottoman-held Bulgarian territory, killing Ottoman subjects, and, in an act of deliberate and spectacular provocation,
capturing and impaling Ottoman tax collectors who came to Wallachia to collect the overdue tribute. The Ottoman response is patient but inevitable. Sultan Mehmed II, who has conquered Constantinople in 1453, who controls an empire stretching from the Adriatic to the borders of Persia, dispatches a force to bring Vlad to heel. The initial attempt uses a Greek ambassador named Hamza Pasha, who is sent to negotiate, or, failing negotiation, to capture Vlad and bring him to Constantinople. Vlad invites Hamza Pasha to talks. When the ambassador arrives, Vlad has him impaled, along with his entire escort. He selects a stake of height appropriate to the ambassador's rank. Mehmed dispatches an army. What follows through the summer and fall of 1462 is a military campaign that, despite its eventual outcome for Vlad personally, demonstrates a tactical brilliance that modern military historians have studied with considerable interest. Vlad cannot meet the Ottoman army in open battle. The size disparity is too great. What he can do is make Wallachia so costly to occupy that the cost outweighs the strategic value of holding it. He implements a scorched earth strategy of comprehensive ruthlessness. Wells are poisoned as the Ottoman army advances. Food stores are burned or removed. Livestock is driven away. Every resource the Ottoman army would need to sustain itself in the field is systematically denied to them. Villages are evacuated and their contents destroyed rather than left for the enemy to use. And he uses disease as a weapon. He identifies people in the population suffering from serious illnesses, including tuberculosis and leprosy, and rather than evacuating them with the healthy population, he sends them into the Ottoman camps. He is weaponizing the sick against his enemy in a form of biological warfare that predates any formal articulation of germ theory by 4 centuries. The campaign culminates on the night of June 16th to 17th, 1462, in what the sources call the night attack, Atacul de Noapte. Mehmed's army has advanced into Wallachia and is encamped with a force estimated at various points in different sources, but reliably in the tens of thousands. Vlad leads a force of somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 Wallachian cavalry in a night raid directly into the Ottoman camp, specifically targeting Mehmed's command tent. The attack does not kill Mehmed. The Sultan's guards respond in time, and Vlad's forces, having penetrated deep into the camp in the confusion of darkness, cannot locate the command tent quickly enough. What the night attack does accomplish is spectacular chaos. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers are killed in the confusion. The camp, which should have been secure, demonstrates its vulnerability. And the psychological impact on an army that was supposed to be pacifying a small buffer state rather than fighting for its life in the dark ripples through the Ottoman forces in ways that their commanders cannot fully contain. Mehmed presses on. His army advances toward Targoviste, the Wallachian capital. And that is when they find the forest. Chapter 10. 20,000 bodies. The exact figures vary by source, but what the Ottoman army finds as it approaches Targoviste in the summer of 1462 is consistently described across multiple accounts. A field of impaled bodies stretching across a distance that different sources estimate at anywhere from a mile to several miles in depth. The victims are prisoners taken during the military campaign, Ottoman soldiers and Bulgarian captives who had been supporting the Ottoman advance. They are impaled on stakes arranged in formations, the height of the stake calibrated to the rank of the victim, the orientation and spacing deliberate. The Ottoman diplomat Tursun Bey, who was present with the army and whose account has survived, writes about the scene in terms that are specific enough to have been taken seriously by subsequent historians. He records the scale of the display, the precision of the arrangements, the effect on the soldiers who witnessed it. He records that the Sultan himself, who had seen more death and more violence than most men who have ever lived, looked at what Vlad had created and was visibly shaken. Critouvulos, a Byzantine historian writing shortly after the events, records that Mehmed II, the man who had broken the walls of Constantinople with the largest cannon ever built, who had systematically dismantled the remnants of the Byzantine Empire, looked at the field of stakes outside Targoviste and made a decision. He decided that Wallachia was not worth this. He decided that a man capable of creating this and doing it as a calculated strategic communication rather than as a spasm of violence was a man whose territory would cost more to hold than the strategic value justified. He withdrew his army. Let that settle. The Sultan who ended a 1,000-year-old Christian empire, who had conquered the city that had held the cultural memory of Rome for 1,000 years, looked at what Vlad III had built and concluded that the price of defeating him was too high. This is not mythology. It is in the sources. It happened. Mehmed does not abandon the campaign entirely. He leaves a force in the field and encourages Radu, Vlad's younger brother, to lead an Ottoman-backed counteroffensive that will exploit the internal divisions in Wallachia that Vlad's methods have inevitably generated. But the Sultan himself withdraws, and the message carried by that withdrawal reverberates through the diplomatic correspondence of every power following events in the region. Vlad III made the conqueror of Constantinople decide the cost was too high.
Chapter 11. The Brother Who Became the Enemy. The campaign led by Radu the Handsome against his own brother is one of the more psychologically complex episodes in a story that is not short of psychological complexity. Radu is everything Vlad is not in terms of presentation. He is charming, handsome, as the historical record insists on noting, socially skilled, and possessed of the ability to make people around him feel comfortable and valued. He is also, by the time of this campaign, a committed Ottoman loyalist who has converted to Islam and spent most of his adult life as a senior figure in the Ottoman court. He has no particular fondness for Wallachia as a political or cultural entity. He has a great deal of fondness for the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed, whose companion he has been since childhood. What makes him specifically dangerous to Vlad is not his military ability, though he has that. It is his name. He is the other surviving son of Vlad Dracula. He is a legitimate claimant to the Wallachian throne, one that the boyars who have survived Vlad's purges and who have lived for years under the constant possibility of being impaled would welcome as a relief from their current circumstances. Radu does not need to conquer Wallachia. He needs to be an available alternative at the moment when Vlad's support collapses. The support collapses in 1462. The combination of the Ottoman military pressure, the drain of years of constant conflict on Wallachian resources, the accumulated resentment of a boyar class that has been operating under existential terror, and the simple exhaustion of a population that has been living in the most intensively governed territory in the region for 6 years, creates conditions that Radu can exploit without particular military genius. Vlad is forced northward. The boyars who survive his reign shift their support to the younger, less terrifying brother who comes with Ottoman backing. Radu is installed as Prince of Wallachia, a position he will hold for the next 12 years. Vlad retreats into Transylvania, eventually crossing into Hungarian territory and seeking refuge from the Hungarian king Matthias Corvinus. The situation is intensely ironic. Matthias has been receiving substantial funding from Pope Pius II, specifically to support a crusade against the Ottomans. Vlad has just spent years conducting precisely such a crusade, doing more practical damage to Ottoman interests in the region than any other single ruler in southeastern Europe. He should be the man Matthias needs. Instead, Matthias has him arrested. The justification presented is a set of documents suggesting that Vlad has been in secret communication with the Ottomans, playing both sides of the conflict in the style that every Wallachian prince before him had played as a basic survival strategy. Whether the documents are genuine or were fabricated by Matthias's court as a convenient pretext to hold a volatile and difficult ally at arm's length while pocketing the crusade money is disputed by historians. What is not disputed is that the man who had done more to resist Ottoman expansion than any ruler in the region was imprisoned by the supposed leader of Christian resistance to Ottoman expansion.
Vlad spends the next 12 or 13 years in captivity at Visegrad, a fortress on the Danube north of Buda. The conditions are reportedly far more comfortable than anything he provided to people he imprisoned. He is treated as a noble prisoner rather than a common criminal. He has access to food and some degree of creature comfort. He is simply not free. The sources from this period occasionally describe him continuing the practice that had defined him, reportedly catching mice and birds in his captivity and impaling them on tiny improvised stakes in his prison quarters. Whether this specific detail is true or apocryphal, it circulated widely enough and persistently enough that it suggests something real about how the people who were aware of his imprisonment imagined the man spending his confined years. Around 1474, Matthias releases him. The political circumstances have shifted enough that a Vlad-shaped piece is useful again on the board. Vlad marries a Hungarian noblewoman, a relative of Matthias's own family. He converts, or reconverts, to Catholicism. He has a child. He appears, from the outside, to be doing the things that a man does when he is trying to become a different kind of person. In 1476, with Hungarian military support, he retakes the Wallachian throne for the third time. He holds it for 2 months. Chapter 12. The Death Nobody Remembers. In December 1476, Vlad III is killed. This much is agreed upon. Everything else about his death is disputed by the sources, and the ambiguity feels almost appropriate for a man whose entire life defies simple narrative. He may have died in battle against Ottoman forces near Bucharest, killed fighting the military that had driven him from his throne 14 years earlier. This is the version most consistent with the kind of end his own legend would have written for him. He may have been assassinated by Wallachian boyars who had no desire to return to the conditions of his first reign. The men who replaced the families he had destroyed were under no illusions about what his return to power meant for anyone who had made their peace with the less terrifying alternatives. An assassination by the class that had killed his father and buried his brother alive would have a symmetry that history does not usually arrange so neatly, but sometimes manages anyway. He may have been killed by his own troops in a moment of confusion during a small skirmish, mistaken for an Ottoman soldier in the chaos of battle. This is the version that strips all meaning from the act, and for that reason may be the truest. A man who spent 30 years engineering the deaths of others, who arranged the positioning and height of stakes with the attention of an artist, killed in a moment of fog of war confusion by men who were supposed to be protecting him, dying for no reason and in no particular way, not as a demonstration of anything. His head was sent to Constantinople. Mehmed II, the Sultan whose army had turned back from the forest of stakes 14 years earlier, had the head displayed as proof that the threat was finally concluded. Whether Mehmed experienced that display as triumph or as something more complicated, given the history between them, is not recorded. His body's burial place is unknown. There is a tomb in a monastery in Romania that is traditionally associated with him, but the historical evidence for the identification is thin. The man who spent his reign making sure that the positions of bodies communicated specific and precise information left his own corpse to be disposed of in the disorder of a battle that nobody was particularly paying attention to. There is an irony in that, if you are inclined to look for it. The most meticulously arranged deaths of the 15th century, and the man who arranged them dies in confusion, his body left in a field, his grave unknown. Vampire stories work because they externalize evil. They take the capacity for cruelty that exists in human nature and they project it outward onto a creature that is not human, that operates by different rules, that can be defeated by the specific instruments of its specific mythology. Garlic, a cross, a stake through the heart. You can kill Dracula because you know what he is and you know what kills him. What is the stake that kills the logic that Vlad operated by?
What is the garlic that wards off the reasoning that a human population can be most efficiently managed through comprehensive terror? What is the cross that defeats the calculation that certain categories of people are net costs to the system that supports them? There is no single instrument. There is no monster-slaying toolkit. There is only the slow work of building societies in which those calculations are not allowed to become the basis for policy, in which the people who arrive at those calculations are prevented from implementing them, and in which the human cost of every decision is accounted for in a way that Vlad III's accounting system deliberately excluded. He is more frightening than the fictional version for the same reason that real violence is more frightening than film violence. Because it happened. Because it was done by a person. Because persons are capable of it under the right conditions. Because the right conditions are not as rare or as specific as we would like them to be. He was made by a world that handed children to empires as collateral against the behavior of their parents. He was shaped by years of captivity in which every lesson about power was mediated through helplessness. He came back to a country that had killed his father, blinded and buried his brother alive, and occupied his throne. And he built, out of all of that raw material, a system so efficient that the greatest empire on earth decided it was not worth dismantling. He was not born this way. He was made this way. And that is the final, unresolvable discomfort at the center of his story. Because if he was made, then the making is something that can happen. And if the making can happen, then the question of what prevents it is not a historical curiosity. It is a question with present tense. Bram Stoker gave you a monster with a coffin and a cape and a castle in the mountains, and that monster can be staked and sunlit and garlic-warded into irrelevance. History gave you a man who ate his lunch in a forest of the dying, who nailed hats to heads and impaled monks and burned rooms full of sick people, and made the conqueror of Constantinople decide the cost was too high. That man cannot be staked. His logic is not dependent on darkness or moonlight or an invitation across a threshold. It operates in the daylight, in the document record, in the reports of people who were there and could not look away. The fictional Dracula will never hurt you. The real one already showed you what a human being can do. And the most important thing about that, the thing that the horror movies never tell you, is that he did not do it in spite of being human. He did it because of it. If you made it to the end of this, you are not here for easy history. You are here for the version that does not look away when it gets dark, the version that follows the logic all the way to where it ends. Hit subscribe, hit the like button. This is Yesterlore, the best dark history channel in the world, and we will be here with the next one the moment you are ready.